Are you afraid of going to hell for yourself or maybe for a loved one? What if hell doesn't exist and the judgment of Gehenna, a place that Jesus warned of, well, what if that judgment already happened? Hi, I'm Phil. Welcome to this power message entitled, The Judgment of Gehenna, Been There, Done That. This is our 14th installment in the Say What series. And our third message about Gehenna, a Greek word that many Bibles have translated, erroneously I might add, into our English word hell. So please visit our YouTube channel and look for the Say What category. And there you can check out all of our previous messages. And while there, click onto the subscribe button. Do it now, so you'll be the first to receive each of our new Power Gospel videos. In our two most recent Power messages, we studied this Greek word, Gehenna. And most recently, we considered Matthew chapter 23, specifically the 7 woes of Gehenna. Recall in that portion, Jesus blasted the self-righteous, arrogant religious scribes and Pharisees. And in verse 33, he dropped this blockbuster on them. Matthew 23:33, you serpents, you offspring of vipers, how will you escape the judgment of Gehenna? So according to Jesus, there was a Gehenna judgment coming, and the scribes and Pharisees of his day, they would not be escaping it. So it was a future event coming to them. But for us, I submit, it already happened. It's over. We can read about it and learn about it, but that game, if you will, it's already been played. Let me explain that Gehenna is a Greek word which comes from the Hebrew word Gehinnom, which means Valley of Hinnom. And it was on a real place. On this map, you can see that the Hinnom Valley was located just south and west of Jerusalem, down a steep ravine. It was the town garbage dump, a nasty place, where according to many historians and Bible scholars, stuff was always burning there. Now, if you were an arrogant scribe or Pharisee at that time, and Jesus looked at you in the eye and said you'd be judged in Gehenna, well, first of all, you would know exactly what he was saying, because everybody knew Gehenna was a place of burning and destruction. And Jesus was saying that your fate was to be burned there. Now, in response, you may have said back, hey, Jesus, you, in fact, are the one that's going to be judged because you claim to be God. And since you're a false Messiah, you're going to have the Romans torture you and crucify you. Now, when Jesus predicted that the religious leaders were liable to be judged in Gehenna, the last thing on their mind was that they would be burned for all of eternity, what some Christians like to call eternal conscious torment. The Jews had no concept of that. Hell was not even a thing back at that time. And it wasn't so until 400 years later during the time of Augustine. And we reviewed that, sadly, ever since Augustine, who developed his belief without the aid of reading and understanding the New Testament in its Greek language, he preferred the tainted Latin version instead. Well, ever since then, many other evangelicals have been perfecting this hell thing. Their gospel is one of sharing but scaring, choose or lose, or announcing turn or burn. But we won't take the time to dive into that right now. Let's instead advance to show that the Gehenna judgment, the one that Jesus announced right around 30 AD, well, it was a judgment that those religious scribes and Pharisees of his day would not be escaping. And here's how we know. Jesus went on to say in Matthew 23:36, most certainly I tell you, all these things will come upon this generation. So all these things, the 7 woes of Matthew 23 and the judgment of Gehenna, Jesus said these things were a coming attraction to the generation he spoke it to. And how long is a generation? In the Bible, it's 40 years. So the ministry of Jesus was from AD 30 to 33. So these things would have to occur between AD 70 and 73. Now let's look at Matthew 24 for evidence that the coming Gehenna judgment was coming not to us, but to the generation he spoke it to. Let's read from Matthew 24, verses 1 and 2. Jesus went out from the temple and was going on his way. His disciples came to him to show him the buildings of the temple. But he answered them, you see all these things, don't you? Most certainly I tell you, there will not be here left one stone on another that will not be thrown down. Now that was a specific statement Jesus said to his followers on that particular day. Do you see this temple complex? Do you see these buildings that you all admire? And some people actually worship this temple and their religion more than they worship my Father. Well, this complex is going down. And down it went in AD 70, within one generation of the time when Jesus declared it. The armies of Rome decimated Jerusalem, and the Jews that did not or could not escape, well, they were either captured and made into slaves, or they were killed and their bodies were torched in the fires that burned in and around the city. Now there's even more meat to chew on in Matthew 24, verses 3 to 33, meat that we don't have time to develop now, but all of those troubles were specifically aimed, once again, at that generation. And specifically in verse 15, Jesus issued this warning so that Jews and Gentiles living in Jerusalem, those who were following him, he gave them a signal of when to escape. Matthew 24, 15 to 16, when therefore you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Specifically, Daniel prophesied that one day armed forces would occupy the temple, and that's the abomination part. Then they would destroy the temple, which is the desolation part. And again, we just read in Matthew 24, verses 1 and 2, that Jesus predicted the destruction of the temple. So now when he says in verses 15 and 16 to his followers, when you see this abomination of desolation coming, which means when you see the foreign armies approaching, get out. This is my warning signal to you, or you'll be caught up in this devastation. And to lock down that the Gehenna judgment was a historical one which already happened. Look at what Jesus said in Matthew 24:34 as he nailed down the timeline. Most certainly, I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things are accomplished. So the fiery judgment of Gehenna was coming to the generation that Jesus spoke it to, including the abomination of desolation of the temple complex. It happened. But let's shift gears as I close and look at another judgment that already happened, yet one that has eternal consequences, as a blessing for all. Jesus said in John 12:31 and 32, now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out. As for me, if I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw all people to myself. At the cross, Jesus was judged for all humanity, and as a result, he's been drawing in all people to himself, and he drew me in the mid-80s. How about you? But as I taught in Power Message 76, the word draw is the Greek word helkuo, which means to drag. And fishermen in Jesus' day understood dragging fish in nets against the will of the fish, but according to the will of the fisherman. Let that sink in for a moment, especially those of you who think it was your free will decision to get saved, when in reality, it was the free will of God to save all people. And we will either willingly be drawn in by his grace or dragged in by his mercy. Now also consider Colossians 1:19 to 20. For it was the Father's good pleasure for all fullness to dwell in him, that's Jesus, and through him to reconcile all things to himself, having made peace through the blood of his cross. Now how many will be reconciled? All things, all people, because of Jesus being judged for us at the cross. And finally in 1 John 2:2 it says that he himself, that's Jesus, is the propitiation or the payment for our sins, and not for ours only, but for the sins of the whole world. At the cross, every sin that was ever committed or ever would be committed was judged and paid for by Jesus. So the judgment of the cross, that was an eternal judgment that impacts and blesses everyone, whereas the judgment of Gehenna, that was an earthly judgment that only impacted a specific group of people at a specific time. And now it's over. Been there, done that. Thank you for watching this Power Message. If you want more information on why I believe in Christian universalism, the belief that because of Jesus, all people will be forgiven and loved and reconciled, then go to my website, philhenrypowergospel.org, and click on the About section. And we have many other messages that can be viewed on our website, and also check out our YouTube channel and become a subscriber. And you can follow me daily on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And until next time, may God bless you and empower you.